everybody, welcome in today's video. I'm Jennifer from GenW Arts, and in today's video I'm going to play around with my very first art subscription box, the one from Sophie&toffee, the elven box. And yeah, I'm very excited to try this, and I hope you enjoy the video. Welcome in today's video. It has been a while, hasn't it? The elven box by Sophie&toffee is a very unique one in my opinion, as these boxes are all about resin art. I haven't seen any art boxes similar to this, so that's why I chose for this subscription box. And also because I have been dabbling with resin art a bit since this year, so I felt this box could genuinely teach me something new. Anyways, let's see what's in this October box. Yes, I am a bit late. As you can see, the box looks quite filled with a lot of stuff. Each month has a theme for the box, and this month's theme is Seascape. Firstly, we get a booklet in which you can check if all the items are present in your box. I got the premium box, so I got a few extra items which you don't get in the standard subscription box. Also, there is a quick instruction in the end of the booklet that teaches you how to complete the project and how to use the resin. And here we have a silicone spatula, probably for stirring and spreading resin with, and a pair of latex gloves. Then there is this giant seashell. I used to have one of those as a kid, so I kinda had to smile when I saw this in the box. They also included a bag with various smaller seashells. I truly adore the smaller seashells. Next up are a bunch of resin bottles. In the premium box you receive an extra pair of bottles. These are 1:1 ratio epoxy resin, which you have to mix equal amounts of part A and B to get it to cure successfully. I believe it was about 100 grams that you got in the box. The next item is a tiny jar of Japanese star sand. The grains of sand do indeed look like stars. I had never seen sand like this before, so I really thought it was awesome it was included in the box. Then we also get some disposable mixing cups in smaller and larger sizes. Next is a jar of rainbow glitter, which you can mix in with your resin. Just look how shiny it is. It's really pretty. And here we have a bag of moss hidden in something that looks like a tape. The moss you can use to decorate your pieces with or to embed in your resin. Here we have a big and a small roll of tape. And a wooden display easel in which you can display these wooden frames on. And a pair of wooden frames, one round and one square. And last but not least, 4 bottles of pigments. These you can mix in with your resin to color them. And here's everything that was included in the box, which was quite a lot. A quick disclaimer, I am not sponsored by Sophie&toffee. I paid for the box myself, so these are my findings and my honest thoughts on the box. Also, resin is toxic, so always wear gloves and probably not very suitable for underage children. So I mixed equal amounts of the epoxy resin in a silicone cup. Silicone cups can be reused since cured resin won't bond on it and can be peeled off. You need to stir the resin for a couple of minutes until it goes from cloudy to clear. Also a quick tip, if your room is cold, place the resin bottles in a tub of warm water. This will warm the resin up and will minimize air bubbles forming when you start mixing part A with part B. Here I am dividing my clear resin in 4 of these plastic cups and add a tiny bit of the pigments to them with a toothpick. Only a small amount is needed to color your resin. The dark blue was transparent to my surprise, and the other 3 were opaque colors. So the project for this box was to make a sea wave coaster on either the round or the square wooden coasters that were included. But I had no idea how it would go, so I did not want to waste the wooden coasters and used some of my own silicone molds for this project. Firstly, I poured the dark blue, then the turquoise blue and then the white. In the small coaster I added a bit of the sand color to create a beach. The small one I will do the box projects with, but for the larger one I will go a bit wilder and make it into something of my own with supplies that are not included in the box. But kinda because I wanted to see and also share with you how you can incorporate resin and the stuff from this box with your own art. Once the first pour is done, I let it cure overnight, and then the next day I mixed another batch of resin and added the pigments. I mixed the star sand for the beach part to get a nice 3D texture on the small coaster. Also I mixed some of that rainbow glitter into the transparent blue to get a subtle sparkle, cause why not? Now I am pouring the second layer on the small coaster, starting by adding the star sand on the beach, followed by the white foam layers and then the transparent blue. With a toothpick I push the resin into crevices to make sure the entire mold is filled with resin. With a heat gun I am attempting to create the cells between the white and the blue resin. It did not quite work as I wasn't sure how to do it anyway. Then I moved on to the larger coaster and added the white resin through the middle and the dark blue covering half of the coaster. I kinda wanted to create waves in layers on this one, as it will serve as a base for the idea I had in mind, so I did not want to end up with a flat coaster for this one. Hence why I only filled half of the mold in this second layer. Then I leave them both to cure overnight again. Epoxy resin needs between the 12 to 24 hours to cure, sometimes even longer. After it's cured I added the final layer on the large coaster with a bit of white for the foam line, and the rest I fill up with just clear resin. Then I pour the remaining clear resin on the smaller coaster so it gets an extra coat and I don't have to waste resin that way. And again I let it cure overnight. Once cured it's time to get them out of the molds, which is like super exciting. Once out of the molds you can tell edges need to be sanded down to get the piece to look more polished. So far I was quite pleased with how both turned out. I mean, it could have looked a lot worse since I am very inexperienced with resin and pouring art. I really like the subtle glitter in the blue parts of the pieces. Off camera I have been sanding the edges and now I'm going to finish the first project by doming it with UV resin. And look, no gloves, very bad. Don't be like me, so don't forget about wearing gloves no matter how enthusiastic you are. UV resin cures under UV light and can cure in minutes, but it is a lot more expensive than epoxy resin and doesn't come in large bottles, so for large projects it's cheaper to use epoxy resin. There was no UV resin in the box, so I used my own that I bought from Green Stuff World. Lastly, I decided to add a bit more star sand on the beach of the small coaster. I do this by mixing the sand with a bit of UV resin on a piece of baking paper, and then pop the coaster under the UV light for a couple of minutes. Then onwards to the second project. I sketched out my idea for the second coaster. I want it to be a base for a dolphin and her calf jumping out of the water. I cut some templates for the dolphins out of cheap crafting paper. These will be my templates for the polymer clay dolphins I'll be making, to make sure I stay on the right size, so I won't go too small or too big. With a piece of aluminum wire and foil I create the armature for the parent dolphin. This will ensure the clay will retain its form while baking in the oven and also adds extra strength to the sculpture. I keep using the template to check if I'm staying on the right track with the size. When I'm happy with the armature, I grab my clay and start blocking in the rough shapes, covering the entire armature with clay. I am using Super Sculpey Medium, which is a polymer clay, so it will need to be baked in an oven to cure. This clay is quite nice as it doesn't need a lot of conditioning and it isn't too soft or gooey. It holds details very well and overall I find it one of the easiest and quickest clays to sculpt with. However, it is quite fragile once cured, so it does need a good and sturdy armature. And it is a clay that I won't use for very delicate details as it breaks far too easily. Once blocked in, I smooth out all the seams and gaps in the clay with a metal sculpting tool. I'm not sure how to call those things. You can also do this with your fingers. If needed, I will keep adding bits of clay where it is needed, in parts which are dented or just need more volume, or when foil parts are laying bare. Also, I marked out where the eyes, mouth and the fins will be. Every now and then I place a piece on the template to see if I need to add more volume to the piece. He needed a bit more bulk on its back and the belly, so I took bits of aluminium foil and added it on top of the clay. Then I cover the foil with fresh clay and then once again smooth things out with the sculpting tool with the flat end. These tools make it easier to reach in small nooks and crannies to smooth things out there as well. When you're new to sculpting, it can be quite overwhelming to start sculpting. Just remember that when you're having a good armature base, not much can go wrong. When you start sculpting, start with something simple and slowly advance from there. Half of the time, you're working on a piece that will look ugly. That's just how it is. But you will soon see it will all come together in the end. For me, it's like if I get the base shape right, the rest comes a lot easier. Now that I'm happy with the base shape, I start adding the details such as the facial features. I am not going too detailed with this piece as dolphins look pretty smooth and don't have too much crazy textures you will notice unless you are super close to them. So now I'm preparing the dorsal fin and the flippers for this dolphin by shaping small pieces of aluminium foil. Again, I used a template to stay on scale. When the shape of the foil looks good, I am covering it with polymer clay and stick it on the dolphin's back. To make sure it sits secure, I put tiny bits of clay along the seam between the body and the fin and blend these out. If this were a larger sculpture, I would have used aluminium wire to keep the fin mounted onto the dolphin's back. But because this guy is so small, this method works just fine. Now that the dorsal fin is done, I start shaping the flippers with foil using my template for reference. I do all the steps for both flippers at the same time to make sure they will be equal in shape and size. Once covered with clay, I stick them onto the body and secure them with small pieces of clay. And lastly, I'm going to make the flukes for the dolphin's tail in the same manner. And once the parent dolphin is done, I do the entire process all over again for the even smaller calf. And once that one is sculpted, they both go for a baking trip into the oven for about 90 minutes at 130 Celsius degrees. Once they have cooled down and are fully cured, I will prepare them both for painting by giving them a couple of gesso coats. Gesso makes sure your paint will bond to the sculpture so it won't flake off over time. So here they both are, nicely cured and primed. Time to get the paints out. I am using various brands of paint, but I always try to use quality paint or pigments that won't fade over time. In this case I am using acrylic paint from Royal Talents and Green Stuff World for the base colors. For the gesso I used the one from Liquitex. Painting a sculpture looks quite easy, but it is quite the opposite. It is time consuming and fidgety, especially when your sculpture has a lot of details. For example, painting crisp lines is quite hard on a 3D project with a lot of curves. Luckily, these dolphins are not too detailed and don't have too many small nooks and crannies to paint. I went with a dusky dolphin pattern for my dolphins and decided to go for blue hues instead of the more natural gray tones. The blue paint wasn't super opaque, so I needed to cover the blue areas 2 or 3 times to lose the patchy look. I try to keep the paint job clean, even though I plan of using a couple of layers of pastel powder on top of it, so I'm not bothered to be too perfectionistic about it, since the pastel will smooth out the edges between the blue and the white colors. People have asked me if you can use oil paints to paint your sculptures with, and yes, that is possible. I personally don't work with oil paints because of its slow drying times, which of course is a great advantage to other artists, but to me it has been a thing that put me off from using oil paints. Acrylic paint and pastels just work a lot faster. Now that I'm done with my acrylic paint base and the sculptures had their first fixative coat sprayed on, I took out some of my pen pastels to deepen the blue shades and to add some shadows and depth to the sculptures. Even though you're working on a 3D surface, your piece will look quite flat if you stop painting after just applying the base coat. I love using pastels or pigment powders to add extra depth in my sculptures and colors and breathe more life into them. I found pan pastels are wonderful for this, as they don't create a lot of dust and are a lot cleaner to work with than when using grinded pastel sticks or pigment powders. But when you work with pastels or pigment powders, you will have to fix each layer with a fixative spray, otherwise new layers won't grab onto the surface and the applied layer won't be permanent. When using fixatives and varnish sprays, do this in a well-ventilated area. Same goes for when you're using resin. Make sure your workspace is well ventilated and make sure no pets or small children are nearby. For the last layer I'm using some pearl powders to get a nice healthy sheen on the skin of the dolphins. So now the dolphins are done and the big one can be mounted on the base. Before I mount the calf, I want to make some water splashes with UV resin on baking paper. I take my UV resin bottle and scribble water splashes on it, then cure it with a UV light. Then I add a second layer to add some depth and watery texture to the splash, and once again I cure it for a minute under a UV light. Then I peel the piece from the paper and turn it around and add some resin to the back, because the back looked flat and cloudy because of the paper's texture. So now we have a nice water splash which can be mounted onto the base. Before I glue it on with the UV resin, I try placing it in various ways just to see what looks best. Then I seal the splash onto the base with UV resin. I am repeating these steps for the rest of the splashes. If you have a silicone mud, you could use that to draw the splashes on instead of the baking paper. But the baking paper works just as well and is a lot cheaper to buy. It only leaves the backs of your pieces cloudy, but that can be easily fixed by adding resin or gloss varnish to it. In the meantime, I have already mounted the calf onto the base with UV resin and keep on adding splashes around the dolphin until I'm content with how it is looking. The small UV light I got from the Sophie and Toffee starter kit, which is a kit you can buy that has all the essentials in it to do resin art. And you don't need a subscription to buy that box. I will leave links in the description box below for you who want to take a look. Now I want to dome the base to get rid of the ugly edges. So I make a final mix of the epoxy resin in a 1:1 ratio and carefully start distributing the resin all over the base. I use a wooden skewer to guide the resin to places it hasn't covered yet. Then I'll leave the piece to cure overnight. Once it is cured, I want to do one final thing. I took my pot with glass bead gel out from the brand Golden and started applying the gel on the white foam lines and the dolphins and on the splashes. The tiny glass balls add to the foamy and the water particle effect. When you apply it, it looks white, but it will go transparent within hours. Could take longer if your application was too heavy. And there you have it. I was super impressed with my first elven box and had tons of fun. There was really a lot to work with, even though I did not use everything that came in the box for today's project. But yeah, I'm stoked. And it's awesome just the possibilities you can do with resin. I can't wait to play around with the November and December box, which I'll be using together next time. Only critique I have is about the project's instructions. It is a bit plain and basic. I would have loved for the booklet to have an illustrated more in-depth tutorial than a one-page instruction list. Then it would be perfect. But this box definitely has whetted my appetite for resin art. And I don't know. I just love how unique this box is compared to other art boxes. Anyway, we are at the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me a like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss out on anything. Also hit that bell icon thingy. Anyway, if I don't make it to put another video up before the end of the year, I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a very healthy and artsy New Year. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you around in the next video. Have a good one.